There is a moment, buried not in the pages of Sunday sermons, but in the quiet whisper of esoteric tradition, when Jesus turns to Thomas and utters a phrase so strange, so arresting, that it echoes like a riddle across the centuries. "You will be drunk no more." Most people who hear that line assume it refers to wine, temptation, or earthly indulgence. But ancient mystics tell a different story. A story of a man not intoxicated by alcohol, but by illusion. A man lost in the fog of a world that feels real, yet isn't. A man whose mind is clouded not by drink, but by the dream we call reality. Tonight, we're going to lift that fog. Imagine this: a hidden conversation between master and disciple. Two figures seated away from the crowds, away from the noise, speaking in a language of symbols, metaphors that only a few would ever truly understand. Jesus wasn't merely offering Thomas comfort, he was initiating him into a deeper seeing, a sober seeing, the kind of clarity that shatters the old world and reveals the invisible one humming underneath. What did Jesus mean? Why Thomas? And what exactly was this drunkenness that plagued humanity long before the invention of wine? As we travel through ancient texts, whispered Gnostic teachings, and fragments of wisdom scattered across early Christian mysticism, you'll discover that this phrase wasn't a rebuke. It was a prophecy, a promise, a key, one that unlocks a doorway into the forgotten dimension of consciousness, the realm where the blind see, the asleep awaken, and the intoxicated become sober in the deepest spiritual sense. In this video, we will peel back the layers of this cryptic saying. We'll explore the lost context behind Jesus' words, the philosophical weight carried by drunkenness, and the mystical clarity that Thomas embodied as a result. But more importantly, we'll confront the uncomfortable truth that the same intoxication Jesus spoke of has seeped into our own minds, and that his ancient promise still applies to us today. So take a breath, settle into the mystery, and prepare to remember something your soul has always known. To understand the moment when Jesus told Thomas, "You will be drunk no more," we must step far outside the familiar boundaries of traditional scripture and enter the shadowed corridors of early Christian mysticism, where teachings were whispered rather than preached, and truth was encoded rather than declared. In the centuries following Jesus' life, dozens of spiritual communities sprang up across the Near East, each holding fragments of his teachings, some recorded, some memorized, some protected like sacred fire. Among these communities were the early Gnostics, seekers who believed that Jesus didn't simply come to save humanity, but to awaken it. To them, Jesus wasn't only a miracle worker, he was a revealer, a bringer of hidden knowledge, gnosis, that freed the soul from the illusions of the material world. It's within this mystical landscape that the enigmatic Gospel of Thomas emerged. Unlike the narrative Gospels, it contains no stories, no miracles, no chronology. Instead, it's a collection of secret sayings, many of which feel like riddles, paradoxes, or cryptic instructions. Scholars debate its origins, but spiritual seekers recognize its tone. It speaks like a teacher addressing initiates, not crowds. In this tradition, drunkenness becomes a metaphor, not for literal intoxication, but for the human condition itself. To be drunk was to be mesmerized by the sensory world, seduced by appearances, trapped in the dream of separation. A person could walk, work, speak, believe they were awake, and yet be unconscious to their own divine origin. This idea didn't arise in isolation. Ancient Egyptian initiates used similar language, describing those who lived in the stupor of forgetfulness. Greek mystery schools spoke of the drunkenness of the flesh, The disorientation that comes from believing the physical realm is the ultimate reality. Even Eastern traditions, thousands of miles away, warned of Maya, the cosmic illusion that makes the eternal seem temporary, and the temporary seem absolute. So when Jesus tells Thomas he will be drunk no more, he is not scolding him. He is identifying him. He is naming Thomas as one who will pierce the veil of illusion, one who will step out of the fog that blinds humanity. Historically, Thomas was known among some early communities as the twin, not of blood, but of spirit, a disciple whose inner nature mirrored the teacher's own clarity. Certain mystical texts portray him as the one who understood Jesus, not through explanation, but through recognition. But why was this teaching hidden? Why didn't it become part of mainstream Christianity? Because to declare that humanity is drunk is to challenge every authority that relies on people staying intoxicated with fear, obedience, surface-level interpretations, and the belief that salvation lies outside themselves. A sober humanity is a powerful humanity, capable of seeing through the illusions that institutions construct for control. Over centuries, these subtler teachings were filtered out, labeled heretical, or simply forgotten. Only fragments remain, like dry leaves preserved between ancient pages, waiting for someone willing to listen. And now that someone is you. In the next section, we'll take the first step into the deeper meaning behind this mysterious promise. We'll explore what drunkenness truly symbolizes in spiritual language, and why Thomas was chosen as the one to transcend it. To grasp the full weight of Jesus' words, "You will be drunk no more," we must peel back the metaphor layer by layer, like an ancient scroll, revealing its hidden ink beneath torchlight. In mystical language, nothing is ever said plainly. Every sentence is a doorway. Every symbol is a map. And drunkenness is one of the oldest metaphors in spiritual history. In esoteric traditions, drunkenness represents a state of consciousness where the mind is clouded by illusion, where perception is distorted, and one mistakes shadows for truth. It is the human condition of being hypnotized by the world of form. Most people live in this state unknowingly, believing their thoughts are reality, believing their fears are facts, believing their identities are fixed. This is the intoxication that binds the soul. The ancients described this condition as a kind of spiritual amnesia. To be drunk was to forget who you are, to forget the luminous source you came from, to forget that much of what you perceive has been shaped by conditioning, trauma, culture, and survival instincts, not by truth. Imagine waking up after a night of heavy drinking. For a few moments, reality feels blurred. Your memory is unreliable. Your sense of self feels scattered. This is the exact analogy the mystics used, not for a morning after, but for the entirety of ordinary human life. We walk through our days in a haze of assumptions, attachments, opinions, projections, and unquestioned beliefs. We rarely question the nature of the self who is doing the thinking. We rarely examine the lens through which we see the world. This is why enlightenment has been described as sobriety of the soul. It is the sudden, profound clarity that cuts through illusion, like lightning in a dark sky. So why Thomas? Thomas, in many mystical retellings, is the disciple who doubts, not because he is faithless, but because he refuses to accept anything unexamined. Doubt, in esoteric thought, is not disbelief. It is the refusal to be fooled by a surface explanation. Thomas was the one who needed to see, not merely hear. And in spiritual circles, this trait is not a flaw. It is the mark of someone on the brink of awakening. Jesus' statement to Thomas was not punishment, it was prophecy. He was telling Thomas that the fog would lift, the intoxication would dissolve, and he would see reality with sober, awakened eyes. In mystical language, this is equivalent to saying, "You will no longer be deceived by the world." But what exactly deceives us? This is where the metaphor deepens. The wine of illusion has many ingredients. 1. Fear. Fear distorts perception, making shadows look like monsters. It narrows awareness, creating tunnel vision. A fearful mind is an intoxicated mind. 2. Ego. The sense of being a separate self, a small I isolated from others, creates a constant background tension. Ego thrives on comparison, judgment, defense, and clinging. It blurs the true nature of existence. 3. Desire. Not simple wanting, but compulsive craving. The kind that convinces us happiness lies just out of reach, always in the next achievement, the next possession, the next relationship. 4. Social conditioning. We inherit beliefs, behaviors, and worldviews unconsciously. These layers act like sediment in wine, clouding the clarity of perception. 5. Identification. When we believe we are our thoughts, emotions, roles, or stories, we mistake the ripples for the ocean. This is the deepest intoxication of all. Jesus' statement to Thomas suggests that sobriety, true spiritual sobriety, is possible. It's not the absence of emotion or thought, but the presence of clarity beneath them. It is seeing the world without distortion, seeing the self without illusion, and seeing the divine not as distant, but as the very essence of consciousness. And this awakening isn't abstract. It has stages, signs, and symptoms, many of which Thomas would go on to experience. In the next section, we'll enter even deeper waters. We'll explore how ancient traditions interpreted this state of sobriety, what mysteries surrounded Thomas's transformation, and how this single cryptic phrase might represent one of the most radical teachings Jesus ever gave. If the first layer of Jesus' promise to Thomas, "You will be drunk no more," reveals the nature of illusion, then the deeper layers reveal something far more radical, the transformation of perception itself. In mystical traditions, this shift is not subtle, it is seismic. It is the moment when the world that once seemed solid begins to shimmer, revealing its hidden architecture. To understand this, we must look at how ancient seekers described the transition from drunkenness to sobriety. They spoke of it as an inner alchemy, a purification of the senses, an awakening of intuition, and a reorientation of consciousness away from appearances and toward essence. In Gnostic symbolism, the drunk person is one who stumbles in the dark, mistaking noise for truth and reflection for reality. The sober person sees through the deception, not by rejecting the world, but by recognizing its deeper nature. Thomas's journey reflects this shift. His so-called doubt was never about unbelief. It was about refusing to drink from the cup of illusions. There's an old saying in the mystical circles of the Middle East: the last to believe is often the first to know. Thomas embodies that principle. While others accepted teachings at face value, he questioned, he probed, he sought direct experience. And in esoteric wisdom, direct experience is the lifeblood of awakening. This is precisely why the phrase Jesus spoke to him is so potent. It wasn't addressed to a man who was lost, but to a man on the cusp of clarity. To the mystics, being drunk meant being entangled in the projections of the mind. Thoughts, emotions, and impulses swirl like fermented wine, producing hallucinations of identity. I am this, I am that, I need this, I must have that. But once the fog begins to lift, once the intoxication subsides, those thoughts lose their authority. The illusions that once dictated one's entire life are suddenly recognized as fleeting ripples on the surface of consciousness. Ancient Eastern texts call this the Great Sobriety. Mystery schools in Greece called it nepsis, the art of watchfulness. Early Christian mystics simply called it the awakened heart. And Thomas? He became a symbol of this awakening. There are early traditions claiming Thomas traveled farther than any other apostle, carrying with him not just the teachings he learned, but the clarity he embodied. Legends say he moved across deserts and seas, teaching that the kingdom of God is not a place, but a perception, a way of seeing, a state of consciousness, one that becomes available the moment the intoxication of illusion fades. Some mystical writings even describe Thomas as the one who first understood the twinship Jesus spoke of, the idea that the divine and the human are not separate, but two reflections of the same essence. In this interpretation, Jesus' words, "You will be drunk no more," become an initiation into that realization, a recognition that Thomas would soon perceive himself not as dust yearning for heaven, but as spirit playing in the clay of the world. But there's another layer, a more unsettling one. In many ancient teachings, sobriety is not comfortable. When the illusions fall away, the structures that once seemed stable begin to shake. The ego resists. Old identities dissolve. The world feels unfamiliar. You begin to see the mechanisms of culture, belief systems, and emotional patterns with piercing clarity. This is why many traditions claimed that only a few could truly withstand the shock of awakening. This is also why Jesus' statement was both a blessing and a warning. For Thomas, sobriety meant stepping into a world that looked the same on the outside, but felt radically different on the inside. It meant no longer being fooled by appearances. It meant recognizing the divine in places others overlooked. It meant acting from truth rather than fear, presence rather than conditioning. And for us, the promise holds the same challenge. Because to be drunk no more is to begin seeing life as it is, not as we assume it to be. It is to walk with clarity in a world addicted to distraction. It is to become sober in a culture that thrives on spiritual intoxication. In the next section, we bring this ancient insight into the modern world. We translate mystical clarity into practical methods, techniques you can begin using today to lift the fog, awaken perception, and experience your own version of the promise given to Thomas. If the story of Thomas teaches us anything, it's that clarity isn't a miracle granted to a chosen few. It's a shift available to anyone willing to step out of the fog. The ancient promise, "You will be drunk no more," is not merely a historical statement. It is an invitation, a call to awaken from the illusions that govern our perception and reclaim the inner clarity that has always been our birthright. But how do we do that? How do we sober the mind in a world that thrives on distraction, noise, and emotional intoxication? The mystics, Christian, Gnostic, Eastern, and otherwise, left behind practical methods, rituals, perspectives, and internal practices that dissolve the fog and sharpen awareness. Here are some of the most powerful ways to begin embodying the same sobriety Thomas achieved. 1. The practice of inner watchfulness. Mystics call it nepsis, the art of seeing your own mind. Sit somewhere quiet, close your eyes, and instead of stopping your thoughts, simply watch them. Observe how they rise, fall, twist, and fade, like waves, like smoke. The moment you observe a thought instead of being pulled into it, the intoxication weakens. You realize, I am the one who sees, not the thing I see. This small shift is the first step toward spiritual sobriety. 2. Naming the illusion. When a strong emotion hits, fear, anger, jealousy, shame, don't suppress it. Name it. I'm experiencing fear. I'm experiencing craving. I'm experiencing ego. By naming the emotion, you separate your identity from the reaction. The mystics taught that illusion feeds on unconsciousness. The moment you bring awareness to it, its power dissolves. 3. The Desert Walk. Thomas was known as the apostle who wandered, often alone. Solitude was not punishment, it was purification. Once a week, take a walk without your phone, without music, without distraction. Just you, your breath, and the world as it is. This simple ritual trains your senses to perceive without the haze of constant stimulation. The mind becomes quieter, subtler, more awake. 4. The Mirror Ritual. Stand before a mirror. Look into your own eyes, not at your face, not at your expression, but into the awareness behind your eyes. Ask quietly, who is looking? This ancient exercise dismantles the illusion of identity layer by layer. Over time, you'll begin to sense that the you behind the gaze is far deeper, older, and clearer than the personality reflected in the glass. This is one of the fastest ways to experience the clarity Thomas embodied. 5. The disruption of automatic behavior. Every day, choose one habitual action and do it differently. Brush your teeth with the opposite hand. Sit in a different chair. Take a different route home. Eat without distractions. These small acts interrupt the fog of autopilot consciousness, the very drunkenness Jesus spoke of. They remind you that awareness is a choice, not an accident. 6. The breath of sobriety. Mystics taught a breath technique known as the clearing. Inhale deeply through the nose. Hold for 2 seconds. Exhale slowly through the mouth. Do this 10 times. This breath triggers a physiological reset, signaling the nervous system to shift from reactivity to presence. In this state, illusion loses its grip. 7. The Thomas question. Whenever you feel confused, overwhelmed, reactive, or lost, ask yourself the core question Thomas lived by. What is true right now? Not the fear, not the story, not the expectation, just the truth. This single question has the power to pierce illusion instantly. These practices aren't meant to be mastered overnight. They're meant to be lived, slowly, consistently, gently. As you work with them, you'll notice the fog lifting, the mind clearing, and moments of lucid awareness becoming more frequent. This is the beginning of the great sobriety. The same path Thomas walked. The same clarity Jesus promised. What began as a cryptic phrase whispered 2,000 years ago, "You will be drunk no more," reveals itself as one of the most profound spiritual teachings ever spoken. Not a warning, not a rebuke, but a promise. A prophecy of awakening. A statement that echoes far beyond Thomas, traveling through ancient scrolls, mystical traditions, and the hushed wisdom of seekers across centuries, until it lands right here, in this moment, in front of you. Because the truth is this: the same fog that once clouded Thomas's perception still lingers in every one of us. We inherit illusions without realizing it. We walk through life intoxicated by assumptions, fears, desires, and narratives that feel real only because we have never seen beyond them. But clarity, the clarity Jesus pointed to, is not reserved for saints or sages. It is the natural state of a mind returned to itself. Sobriety of the soul is simply the removal of what never belonged to you in the first place. As we explored the historical context, decoded the symbolism, and traced Thomas's transformation, a deeper pattern emerged. Awakening is not a single moment, but a gradual unveiling. It is a journey from noise to silence, from reaction to awareness, from illusion to truth. And like Thomas, each of us stands at the threshold of that journey every day. Whether through watchfulness, reflection, breathwork, or conscious presence, each small act of awareness becomes a step toward the clarity the ancients revered. These practices aren't just techniques. They're invitations to remember who you truly are beneath the layers of noise. So as you move forward, hold this phrase close. You will be drunk no more. Not as a command, but as a possibility. Not as a distant ideal, but as a path you can choose to walk, moment by moment, breath by breath. What illusion will you step out of today? What layer of fog will you let fall away? And what might you see once the mind finally becomes clear? If this journey spoke to you, share your reflections below, explore the deeper teachings in our other videos, and continue walking with us through the hidden corridors of ancient wisdom. Your awakening has already begun.